everybody. My last top 10 video, I talked about my top 10 favorite comedies of the 80s. And I seem to feel like a lot of you were not following what I was saying. I guess I couldn't blame you on one hand because my talking is pretty dumb. It's hard to understand because of how much I stutter or how much I say things wrong. But you still should understand these movies I've talked about because they all are funny. I'm not lying about that. But obviously, since they're not trending or special to TikTok or all that, you all don't want to watch them. I know I did say that you all don't have to be movie buffs, but I'm sure there should be some out there that are watching these videos. If you're a movie buff and you're a fan of comedy, then those are the movies I recommended. But maybe it's just because I don't know. It really isn't many other people out there who are movie buffs that are a fan of comedy films. If there are, please just take those movies as a suggestion. As well as these next films. I'm jumping one decade forward, the 90s. The 90s are filled with some other great comedies, and I decided to go ahead and discuss my love for those other comedies of the 90s today. So, that said, today we are going to take a look at my top 10 favorite comedies of the 90s. Like with last video, it's just ranked off of which movies I find the most funny, and the ones that I just think we all deserve to watch if we're in the mood for some good laughter. Laughter that we can enjoy. Laughter that isn't too stupid or, too corny. Laughter that can be offensive, but in a good way. A way that doesn't actually offend, rather gives you the motivation to still laugh. That being said, let's get started.
Liar, liar. We all know the famous Jim Carrey for all of his funny moments. What made Jim Carrey so hilarious is the way that he can always make these weird faces, these weird forms of talking, or just have the fast movements he can make. He's the cartoon come to life. That's just what makes him hard to work with, because you can never not keep a smile on your face when having to work with this guy. Jim Carrey is by far one of the funniest actors I've ever seen, and this movie can prove some of it. A story about a normal businessman, a lawyer, who was then in a curse where he cannot tell a lie, so makes his court case hard, as well as his entire life hard. As Jim Carrey was the perfect choice, because with Jim Carrey, you can just tell how much effort he tries. He's like the kind of person who tries to lie about something, yet can't, so it's like he just, he goes through the weirdest ways of, he really beats himself up or anything else that's just awkward. It's like this one movie that he just makes himself suffer. But it's Jim Carrey doing it all to himself. I don't know how much of it was all his idea or what of it was from the director, but Jim Carrey, it just makes movies like this so much more fun to watch. It was during the 90s Jim Carrey peaked at his funniest. He had some roles in the 80s, but not a lot of those were very memorable or whatever. He was mostly just playing a B-movie teen star. When he showed up in the 90s, he was casted for more funny movies, because we all knew how funny he could be, and how he will always remain such a hilarious guy, and someone that can just be hard to work with, because when you have a guy like him, he's just so much fun. Robin Hood, Men in Tights. I don't know why I wanted to talk about this movie, I just do. From a famous director, Mel Brooks, who is still an amazing guy to this day, Mel Brooks made some of the funniest films ever. His peak was during the 70s, when he made stuff like Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, High Anxiety, so much, so forth. But in the 90s, even though he didn't have too many great films, one he did make that was really fun is Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Ironically, coming out close to the famous film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, this movie takes spoof at the Robin Hood story we all know and love, while also trying to take some time to focus on that one particular movie that recently came out. The one with Kevin Costner and all that. With Cary Elwes portraying the guy, making him a very awkward person, this movie takes all the aspects of the famous Robin Hood story and makes them as weird, quirky, or just overall hard to handle in all the ways possible. Essentially, it's like, comedy style. It's Robin Hood if it was all messed up. It's the Robin Hood story if everybody was stupid. It's the Robin Hood story if Mel Brooks was involved. That's essentially what it is. Now, call me nitpicky, but he did also make the hit Spaceballs, but I hated that movie. It just didn't make me laugh. Found its jokes to work, but didn't actually work for me. Regardless of just bringing it up for no reason, Mel Brooks is still a great director. He still makes some of the funniest films. Well, okay, granted he hasn't made any funny stuff to this day. The movies he did direct back then were some of the funniest out there. And so, with films like this, I think we all should have a little bit of Mel Brooks in our life. Here's another Jim Carrey comedy, The Mask. Jim Carrey portrays another normal guy who is then transformed into a literal life cartoon character that we all know Jim Carrey as. This cartoon character is actually a real. He's like a guy who walks around and is able to bring his cartoon logic into the real world. And Jim Carrey portrays that role perfectly as he's the one who puts on the mask, and that mask just completely changes his life. He goes from just being a normal dude trying to be a nice guy to the living cartoon character doing whatever he wants. And still being the Jim Carrey we all love. If I had a every time I brought his name up because, God, he's just so hilarious. The Mask is another great example of some of his funniest work. Work that you really cannot stop smiling at. There was even an Oscar for Best Makeup and Hairstyling that was given for it. And yes, that's the perfect choice. Everything about this movie just screams some of the funniest from this guy. Is it his all-time funniest comedy? I can't say it is yet because, man, this guy has done so much great work. So, I will just say now that The Mask definitely is one of his funniest. I just wish I could see more of it, because even with all the great stuff Jim Carrey gives from this one movie, it'd be cool if there was more of The Mask, but we haven't actually gotten a sequel to The Mask ever since. Except for that one sequel this one fan guy made, but that one doesn't exist. I'm talking about Jim Carrey, Mask. This guy, he needs to do more of this. It's just so much fun. Happy Gilmore. We all can think of Adam Sandler now for, Netflix. Nowadays, Netflix is where Adam Sandler is home to. He made films like Hustle, Uncut Gems. There were comedy dramas. Adam Sandler went through a weird evolution, actually. He started off as an SNL star, then went on to have some star roles in weird comedy films that were box office hits but weren't really big reviewed. But then he went on to make some other comedies with Sony. All of them were horrible or, just not very good. And now he's with Netflix making some dramas that can sometimes work as comedies. His evolution is awkward. He may not be one of my favorites, but Adam Sandler can still be a great guy whenever he is funny. Happy Gilmore is definitely the best example of when Adam Sandler is a funny guy. A golfer. He started off as a hockey player, but sucked at it. So he then moved on to play golf, but seems to use all of his hockey aspects in golf, which work out well, as every time he makes a swing it goes far and everywhere but wide. And he uses that skill in some of the craziest ways. What more can you say? Well, how about the fact that this guy can never control his anger issues? And every time someone pisses him off, he just pisses them off even more. The way Adam Sandler acts in this movie is probably the best he can do. It's Adam Sandler using all of his funniness that he actually has. Everything he has that actually is funny, and hardly any of the unfunny stuff that he normally has. At least from what I remember. I don't know how much else to say, but Happy Gilmore is his funniest work to me, and it's sad that not all of his movies worked as a well film, because a lot of them just didn't seem to work well. Happy Gilmore is one of the examples of one of the funny, or at least good films Adam Sandler's made, but after the 90s, man, this guy just, he's not one of my favorites, but for the movies he was funny in, he definitely is a good one. Home Alone. How many times have I talked about Home Alone? A lot. It's still a peak of my favorites, one of my favorites of comedy. I still don't know what else more. Home Alone is just all around a funny film. The comedy about a kid left alone during Christmas time, as he now gets to enjoy being alone with no family for a while, and thus he has to deal with robbers, who he can handle perfectly fine with all of his smart aspects, able to enjoy a whole 3 or 4 days, I actually don't remember, being alone without family. Home Alone is a Christmas comedy that is still my all-time favorite of all the bunch. If you're looking for a fun Christmas film to watch with friends or even like family, you definitely gotta check this one out. Because this one is just still to this day my favorite Christmas comedy of all time. I really don't think there's much else to say about it. I've talked too much about this film. Everything about it's funny. From the weird, fun nonsense the kid offers to hilarious slapstick you get from these robbers. Everything about Home Alone, as well as maybe even Home Alone 2 and none of the other sequels, is a funny treat for me. Wayne's World. Now, if you remember, I talked about Wayne's World before and calling it a movie that I watched first time, not really getting into it well, but watching it more, it's a hilarious adventure. And it's just everywhere you don't need to be serious for. I thought I could supposed to take this film seriously when first watching it, but now that I look back at it, it's obvious we need to actually just get to the humor this movie gives us. Wayne's World's humor is all there. It says it on the poster. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll hurl. That's exactly what you will do. These two are comedy legends. It's an SNL skit that existed for a long time, probably one of SNL's funniest skits, that turned into a movie about two dudes having their own little TV show that recorded in their basement, just trying to become big. But majority of the movie, that really doesn't focus more. Because for a majority of the film, what you gotta focus on is how funny these two can be. Where when they're breaking the fourth wall, making awkward pop culture references, or just being overall a fun dude to hang out with. Wayne's World, I don't know how much more to say because I talked about Wayne's World before. And I still think to this day these two are a real comedy legend. We don't really see much of Mike Myers anymore, but when he was doing films, a majority of them were some of the funniest ever. And Wayne's World is definitely no exception. Hot Shots, Part 2. This is a bizarre comedy film. I kind of don't know if I need more to think about, but as I watched it, it definitely is a fun one to talk about. Hot Shots Part 2 is a sequel to the movie Hot Shots. The original film Hot Shots was already a funny movie. That was a spoof on the famous movie Top Gun, focusing on the story of wingmans, but giving it a weird edge to it, kind of like with Robin Hood Men in Tights. Only this time it was not done by Mel Brooks. It was done by Jim Abrams, one of the creators of Airplane. But now we have the sequel, with this one taking aim at famous film like Rambo, First Blood. The two, I don't know how many it went with, but the First Blood franchise, which was doing well at the 80s, became a comedy spoof in the 90s. With this movie spoofing the famous film Rambo First Blood, with just taking a bunch of the fun stuff we remember it for and not making it serious. It not only does it take spoof at Rambo, it actually does do some for some of the other famous movies too. Like there's a bit of Star Wars, Terminator 2, all some of the fun action films that people remember before. As this movie just really takes a good shot at action. And even though it may look too stupid, that's the point. It's the kind of stupid that you actually get. The kind of stupid that makes sense. That's not forced. It's not just there to, because it's funny because it's stupid looking. It actually has a purpose. Because look at this poster. You know that this movie is just going to be all around awkward, childish. But it's the good kind of childish. It's the kind of childish I find funny. You should find funny too. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. I'll just say it right now. This is Jim Carrey's funniest film. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. The comedy about a guy who is a pet detective and is all around the dumbest pet detective, but still the smartest at the same time. Well, why did I say dumb? He's not really dumb. Ace Ventura Pet Detective is his funniest work because it's Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey is, I've said it before, he's the kind of guy who can literally just be a walking comedy legend. And this movie proves it, as he does everything in his power to be as funny as he can be. His fast talking, his weird facial expressions, his bizarre quotes, everything about him is just so much fun to watch. And being in a movie where he's this weird guy surrounded by a bunch of normal people who are able to take him seriously just makes it all the more funny for me. If you like comedy films, you gotta check out most of the stuff from Jim Carrey. Ace Ventura especially, as this is, in my opinion, his funniest film of all time. And I really don't know how much more to say about it. A pet detective, solving the case of missing animals, but still being the quirky, weird, but still hilarious guy he is. I just wish I could meet this man. Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie. Should this count? It's in some ways a movie, but in other ways just a long-running TV episode. Hear me say it before, Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a TV series from the late 80s and early 90s about three guys, like one guy and a couple of robot puppets, who watch a bunch of weird vintage B movies and do a commentary through them, saying some of the funniest, weirdest stuff. And it is a real great show. I recommend it if you want to watch this one. Just seeing some fun guys saying a bunch of funny commentary through an old B movie you obviously never heard of. This movie does that, taking one big movie and just having them talk through it. The only difference between the movie and the show is that in the show there were freaking commercial breaks and a bit of that sitcom quality through the show running. In the movie, it's movie quality with these guys, and there are no commercials, no breaks, barely even any cuts. This movie runs the wrong time it is. These three just talk through it. Well, four. Okay, I don't remember exactly how many of them there are, but all of them are funny as they can say all the funniest stuff comment through a movie that you never heard of. And the movie alone is unintentionally funny, but these three make it funnier because they'll just say whatever. If you do like Mystery Science 3000, I also recommend you check out this other show similar to it. It's a web series I mostly find on YouTube and Prime called Rip Tracks. It's similar to Mystery Science Theater 3000. It just doesn't feature it features three other guys. One of them is a co-creator of the show, as they look at other movies. Some you recognize, others are just more B movies. Whatever you want to watch, Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a funny show because it's all around the funniest. And this movie is a movie, so that means this movie will make number 2. I had to put Austin Powers at number 1 though because I still am not tired of this film. Austin Powers just became a movie I could really get through, and for many good reasons. The film is obviously a spoof on James Bond, as well as most of the pop culture we remember from the 60s. But of all the 3 movies, I decided the one that I find the funniest is the second one, The Spy Who Shagged Me. The comedy that takes the famous Austin Powers, puts him in an adventure where he has to save a girl, stop Dr. Evil from taking over the world. Everything about this movie is hard to take seriously. It's not just with the humor. It's all kinds of humor I think was thrown at this. They throw in slapstick. They throw in weird spoof comedy, cartoon comedy. The kind of comedy that is everywhere. It is by far my top 3 favorite comedy films of all time. I was debating whether to go with this or Mystery Science Theater 3000, but considering I don't count Mystery Science Theater as one of my favorite comedies since it kind of shouldn't count for what other comedies there are, so I said Austin Powers is because that is technically more of a movie. And it is a great one too. So yes, please watch the Austin Powers trilogy. All 3 of these movies give us some great laughs in every way possible. They're inappropriate sometimes too, but it's the good kind of inappropriate. Remember, it's the kind of dirty, the kind of stupid that you can actually laugh at because it has something to it. There's a reason towards it. It makes sense. It's not just forced. This is the prime example. It always will be.
Now, I would like to give a shout out to this one guy who commented on my list of top 10 favorite comedies of the 80s, asking, hey, you're missing other great comedies. Like, where's this, and this? AKA 3 comedy movies that never even came out in the 80s. If you're not one who commented watching this video, remember, this is a list on my funniest movies of just this one decade. So I don't want you coming back and telling me I missed some that aren't even from that decade. Regardless, whatever decade you like to think of, there are movies out there that are funny, but then there are movies out there that aren't. So if you want me to talk about movies I hate, maybe you can let me know that. Because there may be a movie out there I hate, but you all like for all the wrong reasons. Or maybe I'm just that rude to people who have an opinion. But, okay, the opinions that people my age have are... I just couldn't disagree with more. I'm sorry, but I'm very disagreeing with you teens. I just am.